Welcome to the Arts Lunch at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. I'm Jennifer Oz Freeman. I'm the Associate Professor and Program Director of Theology and the Arts here at United, and very excited to have with us the Reverend Yolanda Norton, the creator and curator of the Beyonce Mass, the creator and mastermind behind GATE, Global Arts and Theology Experience. I got it. It's arts plural. So. And we're excited to have you here to hear more about your work, which you've done some in the Twin Cities, but globally. So welcome, Yolanda.
Thank you. It's good to be here with everyone. As Jennifer said, I am the creator and curator of Beyonce Mass, executive director of GATE. I teach Hebrew Bible and homiletics at Moravian Theological Seminary and Hebrew Bible at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. I guess the first question is, where does the Beyonce Mass come from? Which is, the general question that was raised. And I would say it comes from several places. Kind of most directly, it's a product of a course that I teach called Beyonce and the Hebrew Bible, which is a womanist biblical interpretation class that I constructed years ago and was first able to teach when I was on faculty at San Francisco Theological Seminary. And we use the kind of music and persona of Beyonce to have conversations about respectability politics, Black women's embodiment, Black mothering, Black women's involvement in social movements. And we use that material to form this kind of concept of how are Black women interacting with these issues, how are identities formed by these issues, and then use that as a mechanism for my students to think about how biblical hermeneutics and interpretation takes shape around these issues. So imagine how you read the Exodus text differently, particularly the first 4 chapters of the Exodus text, when you encounter these women in Exodus, when you read it from the perspective of Black women and in conversation with Beyonce songs like Freedom, particularly like the motif that the song draws on, but also, for example, we watched several live performances that she does of that piece of music, and you see her actually using aspects of Exodus motif in her live performance. There's literally when she did it live, she would part the stage and have water fill the stage, and she has men in white pants, women in white flowing clothes marching through this water, kind of conjuring that Exodus motif, conjuring liberation theology. And so we start to have this conversation about how it forms a reading of the women of Exodus. So when I designed the class I designed it within the kind of school of Katie Cannon's pedagogy. Dr. Cannon would say that you cannot, the most effective way to deal with issues of white supremacy, of patriarchy in the classroom is not through documentary and not through this kind of like newspaper articles or fact gathering, that it actually causes most people to shut down emotionally and become unwilling to engage the issue. And so she said, you in her concept, you do that through novels. So she would have us read novels when I took ethics. And I decided that there's kind of that mechanism is effective more broadly in the arts, and so decided to engage music as a platform for this particular course. In doing so, one of the things that I said to my students is that most people, including Black women, are not used to exercising the muscle of centering Black women. And so the initial assignment was to develop a worship service that used Beyonce's music as a storytelling mechanism to center Black women, talk about how Black women were wrapped up in history and in God's work in history. And so we did that as a part of a chapel service at SFTS where I was at the time, and then we got invited to do it in a midweek service at a church in San Francisco, and we were supposed to have 100 people. I to this day cannot tell you exactly what happened, but we had it went viral, and we had 1,000 people show up at worship in San Francisco, which is the most secular city in the United States. So since that would be April of 2018, I've been playing catch up with myself and with my own work. We've had the opportunity to do the Mass in person and virtually roughly 20 times around the world. Yeah, it's a little, it's a lot. And so we've been everywhere from California to Minneapolis, to Kennedy Center to Lisbon, Portugal, doing this work of centering Black women and having what I think is a really fruitful conversation about how we rethink the role of religion in society. And when the things that I've been fascinated most about the Mass is one, we rarely see positive conversations about Christianity in the media. Most often when Christianity gets that kind of coverage, it's because of some kind of scandal. And so it was interesting to think about having conversations with NBC and ABC and the New York Times and HBO, and having people have this conversation and wanting to have a positive conversation about the possibilities of what faith can do, about what Christian worship can do. So that for me has been really compelling, and I'm really actually surprised that the media continues to engage in this conversation, continues to show up, continues to cover it. I think the second piece that has always been compelled me forward is the kind of impact statements, the direct impact statements that we get from Black girls and Black women who attend the Mass, right? So hearing people who are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, Black women say, I've never seen a Black woman preach before, or, right, I've never seen Black women centered in worship. And so that being really encouraging. And, I always talk about this little girl who we encountered in Harlem. We did the Mass in Harlem, and her dad was the sexton of this Presbyterian church where we did the Mass. And so he was there every day because he had to let us into the church for rehearsals, and he was making sure that things were in order and locked up and we had everything that we need. And so he started bringing his daughter. His daughter was just adorable little girl, little thick Afro Dominican girl. And but she always walked with her hands crossed, and she always sat hunched over, and her eyes were always pointed down. But she sat in the rehearsals, and she sat in the worship service in Harlem. And the next day when we went to go pick up our equipment from the church, the father asked to speak to me. And I thought, oh no, what did we break? What did we do? Did a team member say something wrong? And he pulled me aside and he started crying. And he said, today is the first day that my little girl went to school with her head up and her arms uncrossed. And she felt good about herself. And so it's those kinds of moments that keep me going, that keep me encouraged, and let me know, no matter what the controversy is, that we're doing something meaningful in the way that we are engaging the arts and engaging a reimagining of what liturgy can be. And I think the third component is that 50% of the people who come to the Mass are unchurched, and that 50% covers the gambit, right? That's white, Black, Latinx, Asian, that is gay, straight, pansexual, transgender, drag queens, you name it. You've got people who are coming into this worship space. And then the arts, I think the kind of artistic platform makes them feel safe. And so they show up and they're energized. by this moment. And these are the moments where I see beloved community. Again, that same church service in Harlem, I just remember looking up and seeing this like beautiful drag queen sitting next to an 80-year-old church mother, like Black church mother, like in her like Sunday best, hat cocked to the side. And they're sitting next to each other. And this common phenomenon that happens in the mass, which is, you got this 50% of people who know all the words to the Christian liturgy, but don't know anything about Beyonce's music, sitting next to someone who knows every bit of Beyonce's discography, but they don't know anything about kind of traditional Christian liturgy, and the way that they just kind of found each other in that space, and watching the two of them interact in ways that I wouldn't normally see them interact, felt like this conversation about beloved community. And so those are the things that I think keep us going as we continue to do the work and think about the impact of the mass in its various contexts. So that's a little bit of the background. I'm going to pause and see if people have questions, and then I'll show some footage from some of our virtual masses and talk a little bit about the kind of theology and thought process that goes into the work.
You, in passing, used the word, you said whatever controversy might come up. Would you say a word about, like, I mean, obviously, I think the vast majority of the reception of the Beyonce Mass is like overwhelmingly positive by, like you said, like really diverse attendees. But it's not all that, right? So like, what has been like the pushback or other kinds of responses you've received?
Well, what hasn't been? Let's see. We get you of course get the people who don't read, and so in their inability to read or unwillingness to read, have decided that we've started like a cult that worships Beyonce. And so, you've seen like I try really hard not to engage too heavily in what the commentary is that's out there about the mass, but sometimes you get bored, and you want to just see how much stupidity is in the world. And so I've heard it said that I am also a part of the Illuminati, and so that like like I secretly have some connection to Beyonce in the Illuminati, and so decided to form this worship service to kind of subversively get people to worship Beyonce. That's one of my favorites. So like you've got that kind of absurdity that exists in the world, and then all of the like I don't understand the text, I don't understand Christianity, and therefore I'm perverting scripture, things of that nature, which I find really fascinating. So I think like a lot of this negative commentary that happens around the mass really boils down to people's not so subversive, but subversive racism and sexism, right? So one of the things, like I just remember saying to someone who was like very, very opposed to this concept of the Beyonce mass, has your church ever done a Eucharist? And because I knew that their church had, right? And there was no problem with the Eucharist, but there's somehow a problem with Beyonce mass. So it's not that like the infusion of quote unquote secular music into Christian spaces is something new. I didn't create that out of thin air. It's not even something that is foreign to the Black church. It's just that like when you do it and what you're doing is centering the realities of Black women, that concept tends to offend people. It's also the case that like I'm really clear, right? Like that we are an open and affirming space. Um, I have members of my team who are part of the LGBTQ community. It's something that's important to me. I, strive, hate using the word ally, but I strive to at least be conscious about like my own bias and how I can show up for people. And so I name that in the space. Like when we do the welcome, we want to make sure that people understand that like people who are part of marginalized communities in particular are seen and acknowledged and loved. And I'm try to be conscious about saying things like, you can't be committed to Black women's issues if you don't care. Black trans women are Black women too. Black lesbians are Black women too, right? And so people live multiple intersectional identities. And if you're going to do the work of liberation and justice, and you're going to talk about a God who is loving and compassionate, then you cannot cherry pick those things. And so and kind of say that like you are welcome in this space, and the only people who are not welcome in this space are people who would condemn any of those other people, because you can't create safe space if you're not willing to fight for or maybe rather fight against people who would create safe and healthy space for people who are disenfranchised. So you get all kinds of pushbacks in that way, because we're LGBTQ affirming, because we have an open table. All of those things have created controversy around the mass. I think in ways that are supposed to discourage me, but as you, Jennifer, know, I love nothing better than a good fight, right? So like, uh, come with it, and the more people come at me and talk about these kinds of absurd things, like for me the bigger and more grandiose all of these things become. And I just try really hard not to give them any energy or publicity in this justice work we're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions before Yolanda shares the video? Okay, got a thumbs up.
Okay. So I'm gonna start with our communion video. So again, we don't normally do virtual masses, we don't do them anymore. I pray to God we don't ever have to do not another one, so long as we shall live. But when the pandemic happened, so our last live mass in 2020 was at the Kennedy Center. It was Black Girls Rock. It was International Women's Day. And the day after we did the mass at the Kennedy Center closed for the pandemic. And I had to rush and get my singers back on a plane to Portugal, because my singers are the Black Girl Magic Ensemble is by and large Afro-Portuguese, and at that time was entirely Afro-Portuguese. And so for the first month, we just thought like, oh, we're just gonna kind of ride this out. When it's over, we'll, like we didn't cancel the rest of the masses for the year. And of course, we, like everyone else, had a horrible reality check. And around May, we decided like we can't, if we're going to be justice workers, we can't sit around and wait for the pandemic to be over to continue to speak. And so we started to do a series of virtual masses. And we, like everyone else, had to learn how to adjust our art form and think about how to use technology and media and art. And I don't know that we ever perfected it, but we did the best we could. And so Flaws and All is the only song that shows up in every Beyonce mass. Every mass is different, but this is our communion song. And the question that I posed when we got to Flaws and All, like in the first mass, was like, what's the song that gives us a conversation with God? right? And so you have the song Flaws and All that is really a song about relationships. But when you turn it into a prayer, like, oh, there is a reality that most of us are a train wreck in the morning and a bitch in the afternoon. Most of us neglect God when we're working, and when we need God's attention, tend to nag. And so there's something very poetic about this song that I think fits within a communion liturgy. So I'll say that piece. The other piece that I'll say contextually to frame this piece I'm going to show you is that when we did the first public mass, the church where we did the mass, they said to the kind of more popular it became, the more we started to have tension, the more there was a desire to kind of erase Black women out of it, which, the absurdity of it all. And I'll leave out most of their absurd attempts, but one that I thought was particularly amusing and informs this communion liturgy was that they said, oh, we should do the Our Father at the end of communion. And I was like, oh, like, okay, not just the Lord's Prayer, but we're going to call it the Our Father. And so my response, right, and kind of like true womanist trickster concept was, well, what about if we did the womanist Lord's Prayer instead? And they said, oh, we didn't even know there was a womanist Lord's Prayer. I said, oh, yeah. I don't have it with me, but as soon as I get home, I'll send it to you. So the meeting was over, and I drove home. I pulled out my laptop in the car, and I wrote the Womanist Lord's Prayer, and I walked into my house and I sent it to him. And so that's how we got this Womanist Lord's Prayer, and we put it. The decision was ultimately we would put the Our Father on the screen next to the Womanist Lord's Prayer, and then I would read the Womanist Lord's Prayer, and the rector at this church would read the Our Father. So again, as Jennifer knows, I'm not one to like normally be trifled with. So what I did the day of the mass was I made friends with the sound guy that they had hired, because we needed extra sound, as we always do now. And I said, hey, like, here's the script. When we get to this part of the script, can you do me a favor? Can you just cut the other mic? So when we got to the Lord's Prayer, the rector's mic was cut. The two prayers were displayed, but the only voice you heard was mine. So, people follow the voice that they hear. So that's how we got to this Womanist Lord's Prayer. So I'm going to show you the virtual version, which is not perfect, but was our attempt to create some virtual space around communion. Questions, thoughts? All right. If things pop up, feel free to ask, put them in the chat. So that's one piece that we have. The next one is a piece that's a call to worship that we use in a mass, gosh, it would have been in 2020, in September of 2020. And we wanted to, this was a mass that focused on embodiment. And so again, this is the call to worship song. I won't say much about it as a kind of lead into it. What I would kind of ask is that you pay attention to, like, what are the images there? What are the messages you see? What are the spoken and unspoken kind of assertions that you think are made in this video? That's the call to worship, and we can talk about that a little bit after. Let's see, it's a very different tone to this particular video. So I have to say, I like, I'm watching Jen on the screen as the videos are playing, and I know, like, it's doubly amusing for her because she knows all of the singers, so like all of the kind of like personalities, watching them kind of come out on, in these videos. But yeah, that's not even my computer. Okay. What did folks see in the video? You're muted.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm unmuting for the classroom.
Okay.
Go ahead, Grace.
I'm trying to think. I'll start. Yeah, I mean, I noticed just a lot of like Black is Beautiful. I felt like was just kind of like playing over and over in my head, just like seeing just like the like power and like beauty, and just seeing images of joy and like images of beauty. I think we just like need more and more and more of that. So I just felt like that was being really centered.
Yeah, similarly, I noticed a lot of power, but it was interesting that you had a lot of people who were really well known and like powerhouses alongside of people who we don't know, who are just regular people, and it was cool to see them paired next to each other. And I could see how for like a little Black girl, that'd be cool to see regular people paired up next, like Michelle Obama and Stacey Abrams. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah. I was interviewed once by the Canadian Broadcast News, and they asked me some question about like why Beyonce. It's like a common question, and I said because I think she's a Black woman that everybody knows, and she represents something about every Black woman that I know, right? And the white female reporter very innocently asked, but does she? I mean, like, and I said, yeah, just because you know her name, right, doesn't mean that Beyonce is outside of the norm of every Black woman I've ever met in my entire life, right? Doesn't mean that she's the only Black woman that I've ever met who defies people's expectations, thumbs their nose at the like rules of normativity and succeeds, subverts people's expectations. I was like, you feel better about her because you know her name, but in my world, Beyonce is no different than my grandmother and my mother and my auntie, except for she's got more money in her account and more validation from a white lens. And so it was really important for me to put all of these images together, so that we can see that like Black is Beautiful is more than a statement about Beyonce. Black is Powerful is more than a statement about Stacey Abrams, right? And so that these are things that live in a realm for those of us who walk in Black skin and in Black female skin every day.
You see Derek's commentary.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and we wanted, because that this was about Black female embodiment, this worship service, right? We always want to start with like a joyous articulation of what God is doing in the world, because that's what a call to worship is a reminder that God is in that place. And so for this service, God was in that place in the form of all of these magnificent Black women. And then we move into a problem statement from there. And so from there, we did Pretty Hurts. And so, just this conversation about what is it that we put women, particularly Black women, through, to be seen and to be heard and to be validated in their beauty. Right. And so we move from that problem statement into a sermonic selection that's like, where do we find God in all of this, right? So as I said, I also teach homiletics, and Paul Scott Wilson has a wonderful book on the 4 pages of a sermon. And what he says is that you look for the trouble in the text and the trouble in the world. And then you look for God in the text and God in the world. And that's the arc that we follow. Thank you, Derek. That's the arc that we follow in every mass, right? Is that we want to be clear, and it's not a linear thing. It's just that we want all of those things to show up in the mass. And so in that particular mass, we then did Through with Love, which is, I tend to try to pull from Beyonce's discography in ways that most people don't know, but lest anyone doubt my position in the Beehive. I want people to know that I have full exposure to the discography, well beyond what most people do. And so she has this wonderful song that's Through with Love, and she talks about in the song like how she's through with the pain and the suffering that she's been caused by in this relationship, and we turn that into a societal statement, like through with and we interweave it with news clips and misconceptions and tropes about Black women. And so we're through with that toxic love that tells us that like the size of our lips and our nose, the kind of the texture of our hair means that we are anything other than beautiful and wonderful. And one of the things that I love about the Through with Love song, which technically a Destiny's Child song, which like to, again, cover the range of the work, is the song ends by saying, I finally found a new love. And it's like this riff. She says, I finally found a new love. And she says, I found it in God. Right. And so we mixed that part of the song with Nsaki Shange's The End of Her Theo poem. So you hear this whisper out of the, like, after I finally found it in God, you hear, I found an audio clip of Nsaki Shange reading the Theo poem. So you hear, I found God in me and I loved her fiercely. Right. And so that is what led us in that mass into the sermon. And that sermon does mark a kind of transition point in the mass. And then we have, a response to the word, which I think in that mass was halo. And then we go into communion. And then we have a benediction song, which we send people out. And so that's kind of the arc that we take in the mass. So again, if there are questions about the mass that I can answer, I'm gonna before I transition to saying a little bit about our other projects with GATE and how we're moving forward and broadening the scope, but I want to make sure that I can answer any lingering questions that people might have about the mass first.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say it's like really brilliant and amazing. Just like all the things that it seems like you're accomplishing with this one project is like huge and so immediate. Like, I don't know, I'm just like really in awe of like, wow, like you found this thing that really like took on a life of its own, and just seeing like the blending of like secular in the Christian space, like that just, it feels like, I feel like I'm thinking about that a lot. Like, how do I bring this sort of art and Christianity into a space that's kind of bridging these worlds? And like, you've done that. And I guess, was that like a conscious intention of like, oh, we're trying to like really do all these things and accomplish all these things? Or was a lot of this just kind of like residual effects of, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, let me clarify or reiterate. I teach Hebrew Bible. So I'm so used to living in spaces of obscurity where no one cares about anything that I do, because it's generally deemed boring and esoteric. And so it was actually really fascinating to think that like my scholarship, my work, my attempts to have a conversation about the depths of scripture and historical criticism alongside of my realities as a Black woman, like that womanist biblical interpretation could take on shape that was relevant in a larger context, was really, it was powerful for me. It was jarring for me because I'm first and foremost a Black woman, so I'm used to the kind of invisibility and the obscurity of Black women's identity. So it was an absolute surprise to me, and I've tried to take that surprise and use it for the benefit of other people. Like because I'm so entrenched in the world of theology, it was in the early years of my PhD program when I was having a conversation with some of my like college friends, and I was talking about Katie Cannon and Emily Towns and these names that just are so much a part of our lexicon, right? And I was talking about womanist theology, and one of my friends stopped me and was like, none of us know what you're talking about. We don't know these names. We don't know these. I don't know what womanism is. And I thought, oh, that's so tragic, right? And so the Beyonce Mass really gives me a chance to take the things that I do in the classroom and bring them into the world, right? Like when I teach a class, like unfortunately, fortunately, whatever, when I teach a class, I teach 10, 15, 20 students. And I'm trying to expand the way that they think about the text. But when we do a mass, we have 500, 600, 700, 1,000 people. And we're having conversations about womanist biblical interpretation, and we're trying to expand the depths of how people think critically about religion, race and religion, gender and religion. And so there was no way that I could have predicted this. And I have literally spent the past 5 years of my life catching up with this phenomenon that kind of just took life and shape around me. Yeah.
Yolanda, this is Cindy Beth. Good
Hi,
to see you again.
how are you?
It's been a
Yes.
while. I have
Yes.
to, but thank you. This was pure grace, pure
Thank
love, power, everything. Just, I mean, when you said what words, like there are no words. It's too important for even words. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you. So I see we've just got a few minutes. I want to say something about these other projects. So I think a major turning point for me in the pandemic, like most folks, was the brutal killing of George Floyd. And not that it was the first, unfortunately, not that it will be the last. But I think just that idea that like we were all trapped in our homes and dealing with the fragility of life to begin with, and then on top of that, we had to be called to action around the brutal killing of a human being, right? And so just in the wake of that, Stephen Ray, who at the time was the president of Chicago Theological Seminary, he did a panel virtually, and I was watching the panel, and he said something that literally, like, someone ever say something and it just kind of jolts you back physically. He said to be Black and to be a scholar in the theological academy is to be an agent of white supremacy. He said, those of us who have done this work, we have been trained in institutions to think about our discipline from the perspective of white supremacy, to think about the quote unquote tradition. Our validity is marked based on our ability to master the words, the thoughts, and the arguments of dead white men. And then once we've been trained and formed in that, we go and we work in institutions where our job is to teach we're told they've got students have exams in their denomination that they have to that they have to pass, and we're told that there are all kinds of reasons. There are standards of accreditation that have to be adhered to, and that is validation. And then for most theological institutions, there is a push towards quote unquote diversity, which means recruiting Black and brown bodies. And so those of us who have Black and brown bodies are often hired by institutions so that we can help recruit Black and brown bodies. And so then we pull Black people out of their communities and we teach them white theology and white interpretation and other white things that are wholly irrelevant to their context. And we put them in debt so that money and resources that they could commit to their communities are now going to white institutions. And yet when they walk away with this piece of paper and all of this debt, they have a lot of tools that are irrelevant to their context. So Dr. Ray says this, and he says, I call that colonialism. I thought, oh God, I cannot spend the next 40 or 50 years of my life, right? I can't do what Dr. Ray did and look back over my life and think, oh, great. And so I started to expand the programming of the Global Arts and Theology Experience. We created a nonprofit out of the Beyonce Mass, and I started to think about what are the ways that I could use my tools as an educator, as a theological educator, to reach more Black women in their context and develop programs for the edification of Black women and Black girls. And so we are launching a womanist storytelling project that we're actually going to pilot in the Twin Cities and help Black girls do mini documentaries about Black women in their community who have transformed the landscape. So what would it look like to be able to click on a website that had a globe and click anywhere on the globe and see how Black women have changed that community? So we're trying to develop that digital archive. We're hoping to launch a Black Girl Magic Academy that will also target Black girls between 13 and 17 for different parts of the world and teach them Black women's history, Black women's theology, arts, all the things that they never learn in church or the public school system about themselves, in hopes that we can break the cycle of negative identity formation, because knowledge is power. And the arts give us the tool to express that knowledge and to contend with the emotional tension between what you see in the world and what you feel in your person. And so we continue to try to put programming out in addition to the Mass that's more long-term, because we're not interested in coming into cities, tapping resources and then leaving. We want to create a sustainable future for Black girls and Black women. And so that is the work of GATE.
So excited. Could you say a little bit, maybe also about, I mean, I guess I shouldn't, if there's questions about that, or I'll ask you this, and obviously if there's questions, y'all can stick things in it. I know we're kind of at time, but also a couple of events that you have coming up in the next few months. We'll say like 6 months, like 6 months out, you have a couple of things that are like different from the Beyonce Mass, but in the realm of, or in that same work.
Yeah, so we're doing a racial justice revival in Seattle. And so we're doing 4 nights in 4 different parts of the city, each night in a different part of the city, with a different preacher. One, myself, a Black woman, a white man, an Asian man, and
waking up freezing, really.
We never freeze with a good expression, you know.
Yeah,
It's
that's right.
always-
Yeah. Nope,
Am I back?
Oh,
You're
there
back.
you go.
but you're frozen. Oh, and
Oh,
gone.
now you're on. Oh.
Oh dear.
Oh, no, I'm back.
You're
Calm down.
back.
Okay.
Okay.
calm-
So you were just listing the lineup.
Oh, okay. So did you hear Seattle?
Yeah, Seattle.
You got the Twin Cities? We're launching a womanist storytelling project.
Yeah.
Our pilot will be in the Twin Cities, and so we're working with a local nonprofit to do the first kind of mini documentary about Black women in the Twin Cities. So Black Girls will develop a mini documentary on Black women in the Twin Cities. We're gonna do we're returning to New York City to do the Beyonce Mass at Riverside church in September, and then we're hoping in conjunction with that, again, because we want to show solidarity with our LGBTQAI siblings, that we want to do a ball in the, Paris is Burning style of ballroom dancing. And so I'm actually on my way to New York tomorrow to meet with members of the community and try to plan that ball. And we really want to focus that service on us offering some repentance about the way that the church has treated the LGBTQ community, particularly Black trans women, and then have the ball as a kind of celebration of the perseverance of Black women in the face of that violence, that social, emotional, and physical violence. So that's kind of the most immediate work in the months to come.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thank you. It's really exciting. And folks can stay, I mean, you have a newsletter, there's the Beyonce Mass newsletter, and then there's a Gate. Is there a separate Gate newsletter as well, or?
Yeah, in theory, they're both,
Theory.
I would say. Yeah, we're a small operation. So I would say the kind of best thing to do is to sign up for the Gate newsletter, and you'll get all of the information. We are on, we have an Instagram page, a Facebook page, in addition to our website. Yeah, and so we're overhauling all of those things so that we can have a more efficient system for keeping people up to date about what's going on in our world.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yolanda. Thanks for your time, and your busy schedule. Yeah.
I'm actually in the US, so this one is not as painful as some of the other ones. Yeah.
It's in a reasonably close time zone.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks so much. And you and I will be in touch, of
You.
course, but take care.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.